This snow, wow, huh? It's just incredible. I went out hiking and now I'm just enjoying it. Hope you are too. Okay, why have we not started this? Here we go. Okay, so here we go. Another personality lecture. This one's going to be on humanistic and trait theories. Humanism. Two guys. You're familiar with Abraham Maslow, but there's also Carl Rogers. They felt, and this is going to be a little more Rogers than Maslow, but it's really both, that our personality is determined by, one, the nature part is an innate growth drive that they saw as essentially good, in contrast to Freud. But note that they both saw humans as having an innate inherited nature, different from, say, the social cognitive people who didn't worry about that, or the behaviorists. That innate growth drive can either be nurtured or hindered by our life experiences. If it is nurtured and allowed to blossom like the beautiful flowers in the background, the individual's growth will result in them being self-actualized, reaching their full potential. Now, as we think about this, I'm not going to talk about Maslow so much. You can kind of just fit his theory into this. So you should review his hierarchy of needs and understand his theory and be prepared to answer questions on that. One thing that wasn't clear, I think, on that motivation emotion test is growth versus deficiency. If you take Maslow's the five-level hierarchy of needs, the key part about that is the four lower levels are all deficiency needs. The physiological needs, the security needs, the esteem needs, and belonging. Those are things that we have a deficiency in that needs, like we're hungry, that we need to fill. And then once you fill them, you move up to a new level. The key part, or a key part of Maslow's theory, is that we also have growth needs. And once you fill those four lower levels, you then turn to your growth needs to become self-actualized. And the key distinction between a growth need and a deficiency need is a growth need is never satisfied. You don't fill it, you just keep on fulfilling your potential. And so you can kind of hang out for the rest of your life at that growth need, that self-actualization level once you're there. Obviously, if you remember, you're slipping up and down the scale every day. So just make sure you understand the difference between a growth need and a deficiency need, and how that's actually a central part of his theory. And if you think about it, it fits in well with what I'm talking about today. On to Rogers. Just so you have an image of the two, they're both very happy individuals, and that fits with the happy theory of humanism. Maslow is there on the left, Carl Rogers is on the right. Maslow is probably more familiar in just the culture because of the hierarchy of needs, but Rogers is as important, and probably this theory is more his than Maslow's. Rogers was the more clinically oriented, meaning he was interested in seeing patients and treating patients and helping them. And so his theory, called Rogerian theory or Rogerian therapy, is, I know it used to be used a lot. I don't know how much it is anymore, and that's more just because I'm ignorant. So the key for both of them, but in Rogers' theory, is that we all have an ideal self. It is who we really are or could be, our innate nature, our talents, our interests, what we're driven to be, whether it's an artist or a ruler or a helper, or someone who wanders about the world seeing the beauty in nature. So we have that ideal self. The Most important part of our personality, though, is our self-concept, which is, excuse me, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with our ideal self. That is who we see ourselves as, the perceptions we have about ourselves, our beliefs, how we feel about ourselves. It has to do with self-esteem, but it's not just self-esteem, because that's how do you feel good about yourself, your worth. Self-concept is how do you see yourself also. Um, Self-concept is not innate, that's learned through our life experiences and primarily our social interactions. So how do others treat us? Are you the younger sibling that everybody runs around saying, oh, you're such a goofball? Then even if you weren't a goofball, you might eventually see yourself in that way. So it's kind of defined by others. Um, Healthy versus unhealthy development is really going to hinge on the very simple thing of, does your perceived self or your self-concept, how well does it match your ideal self? Um, so the key is what we would probably call unconditional love, what Rogers called unconditional positive regard. Do the important people in your life, family, people who you look to, important friends, uh, make you feel good about yourself regardless of your behavior or actions? Do they unconditionally give you affirmation or unconditional love? You break a window when you're 3 with a ball. Your parents help you clean it up and teach you got to be more careful with the ball, but basically, like, it's all right, I understand, Timmy. Or do they, like, you're such an idiot, I told you to be more careful. If you are given unconditional positive regard, then you will have congruence, meaning your ideal self and your perceived self or your self-concept will have a great deal of overlap. Not complete, but some. Unhealthy development is conditional love or conditional positive regard, and that leads to incongruence. So what Rogers felt was that people who are unsuccessful as adults in their lives, or are even evil, Charles Manson, Adolf Hitler, they weren't born that way. They could have turned out great. But they just didn't get the environment they needed. And that doesn't have to be um, necessarily the fault of the parents so much as it was just a mismatch between perceived self and ideal self. A really classic example of this is a movie and musical Billy Elliot, where I think it's in working class England. It might be Ireland. Billy Elliot is, back in the day, expected to be a boxer and a tough guy, and he just wants to dance. And he actually is a very talented, passionate dancer, and a gruff ballet teacher lets him try, and his dad wants him to, you're not a poof, you're not a dancer, you're a boxer, you're a man. And so in that case, his ideal self, the dancer, is incongruent with his self-concept or what society tries to force upon him. But Billy Elliot, it's a happy ending. He taps into his ideal self and refuses to be diverted from it. So, critique of humanism. Humanistic theory it's a nice theory to develop. It sees the fundamental goodness in everybody. It's positive, people like it. It emphasizes the individual uniqueness of all of us and sees us as, potentially good. And for a parent or a teacher, that's really an important, I think everybody who teaches or has a kid should be a humanist. It's useful in therapy. Rogerian therapy is very useful. It's useful for parenting. On the negative side, it's, maybe a little naive or unrealistic. Is it true that everybody's fundamentally good? A lot of people would say no. Like some people they're not good. They're evil. Can't blame society for them turning out the way they did. Um, More broadly, the theory, doesn't really factor in a lot of other things. It factors in the environment, so there's a nature-nurture aspect there, but not all sorts of learning, kind of unconscious motivations other than this ill-defined innate goodness. It doesn't factor in how our behavior alters in different situations. So it leaves a lot out. It's too simplistic. And the big one, like with many of the theories, has these very vague basic concepts that don't lend themselves to um, objective testing. And it is very Western-centric. Like many of the theories, it fits individualistic societies better than it fits collective ones. So that's the first half of this. I did it in 11 minutes, pretty good. On to trait theories. I don't have a good picture for trait theories, and I didn't put any of the pictures of the people in here. I apologize. You can look up Gordon Allport and the others if you want to. Three big people, or four. Gordon Allport, considered kind of the father of trait theory, has 3 levels of traits. Raymond Cattell has the 16PF thing, and Costa McRae with the big 5. Gordon Allport does not look like Albert Einstein. It'll be clear why I put him on here before. Allport's a pretty important figure in psychology. He's often considered the founding figure in the study of personality. He's the first one. Sure, there was Freud, etc. before him, but he's the one to tackle specifically like getting the essence of what personality is. He also had is known because he studied some really interesting topics beyond just personality. Studied rumor and prejudice, and so he's influential in part because of the interesting things he studied, and also because he had a number of really talented students and proteges, including, among others, Stanley Milgram. He thought that we each had a unique, innate set of traits. Innate obviously means it's inherited. We're going to ignore the phone and hope it's nothing important. He went through the dictionary and eventually came up with paired the list of thousands of adjectives about traits down to 200. And I don't think the book talks about this, but you should know it. That he said there are 3 levels of traits: cardinal traits, central traits, and secondary traits. The cardinal trait is your dominant trait. It's what you're known for. If people had to describe you, one thing about you, they would say this. So that's why I put Einstein up. He's a genius. So that would be his cardinal trait, is just incredible intelligence and curiosity. Mother Teresa is good. Osama bin Laden is evil. Those might be cardinal traits for them. Second to that would be the central traits. These are the basic building blocks of personality. These are things that are found to some degree in every person. They shape most of our personality, but they're not like the one dominant thing. So things like being happy or moody or sad or angry or funny or easygoing or grumpy are all the central traits. I like to think of them as the 7 dwarves. Not all of the 7 dwarves, but those are kind of the 7 dwarves of traits. And then lastly, least importantly, are the secondary traits. These are characteristics that we only see in certain situations. They only come out sometimes. For example, having a fear of public speaking, or being impatient waiting in line, or if you get agitated when you're running late. Those are all traits you have: fear, impatience, agitation, but they only come out in certain situations. So that's Allport. Founding father, thought we had these unique inherited traits, came up with 200, and the 3 levels of traits. Pretty straightforward. Raymond Cattell. His big contribution was cutting the 200 down to 16. He later said there were 23, but he's most well known for his 16-factor test. he differentiated between surface traits. Most of Allport's are surface traits and source traits. So a surface trait would be like shyness or being quiet or disliking crowds. And Cattell kind of distilled that down to its essence, which is somebody who's introverted. So that's how he got it from 200 down to the smaller number. He's known for using factor analysis to develop the questionnaire or inventory of 16 personality factors. You can see it there in the background. 16 source traits, so they're source traits on a continuum from sober and serious to enthusiastic, or concrete thinker to abstract thinker. So everybody's somewhere on that continuum. You can be very extreme or more to the middle. You should know a few of those. In case I were to ask you, in a short answer, what's Cattell's, what are two of his source trait continuum source traits, and you should recognize all of them. Don't spend a ton of time on them. You should, just kind of glance over them so you recognize them if I put them on the test. Lastly, Costa and McRae, man, that's a beautiful picture, huh? They cut the 16 down to 5. And they said these 5 were like the core personality attributes, the minimum you needed to adequately capture or describe someone's personality. You should know all 5. I'm just realizing I forgot to explain something, but I'll catch it at the end. The acronym is OCEAN: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And just like Cattell, they're on a continuum from being very open to being not very open, and they're not judgmental. Neither Cattell's 16 nor these 5 are meant to be judgmental, except for maybe agreeableness. That one's probably a little judgmental. It's not better or worse to be one or the other. And I put a couple of descriptors. I'll just go through them quickly. Openness, you can be creative, imaginative, non-conforming, to very concrete and down to earth. Conscientious, you are organized, reliable, ambitious, versus on the other end of the spectrum, you're lazy, careless, spontaneous. Extroversion, you're talkative, you're affectionate, you're sociable, versus on the other end of the spectrum, you're reserved, you're comfortable being alone, you need your quiet time. Agreeableness, you're good-natured, trusting, helpful. On the other end of the spectrum, you're rude, competitive, aggressive. Neuroticism, you're worrying, you're insecure, versus or anxious, versus being calm, secure, and relaxed. You should know all 5 of those. Is there something I'm forgetting? No, I think that's it. Yes, there is. Just especially I wanted to emphasize that in our society we often value things like extroversion, and there's been a push in the last, 10 or 15 years that to emphasize the fact that that trait, especially extroversion versus introversion, is not a judgment call. That introversion has its positive qualities too, and there's nothing wrong with being introverted. I'll move on from there. Okay. Critique of the trait theories. In the other lecture, which I haven't posted yet, but I will, about social cognitive, Walter Mischel talks about how our traits are not as stable as suggested. So just note that's a little bit of critique. And remember, this is what I forgot to explain. Unlike all the other theories about personality, trait theories are not trying to explain how we got our personalities or their formation. They're not a theory of personality formation. They are simply trying to describe in a consistent way what our personalities are like, and in an important function, to be able to predict, like if what our personalities are based on certain standardized tests, like Cattell's test or the MMPI or the Myers-Briggs test. So just keep that in mind. They serve a different, these theories, the trait theories, serve a different function than all the other ones we studied in this unit. And I think that is it. Oh no, it is not it. Just as a last thought, as I close about this unit, you should kind of take all the theories and be able to kind of contrast them based on different questions. For example, which of the theories emphasize stages? How complete are certain theories of personality? Some are more complete than others. Doesn't make them more right. They just they tackle more of our personality. This is an important one. How does each theory view nature and nurture? You should. I've asked that question in the Unit 1 test, and we'll either come back to it on this test or it's fair game, at any point. Do humans possess innate characteristics or drives? So that's like a subset of the previous one. Do we have a nature? What is our nature? And what's it like? Are humans fundamentally good? That's, again, a subset of the nature question. Which theories are seen as kind of simplistic? Which theories are seen as unscientific? Which try to explain versus describe and predict? So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. That was a much better lecture.